This video is a compilation of every video I've done on Half-Life. This includes lore, trivia, and theories. If you're new to Half-Life or the channel, this is a great place to start. And a lot of my subscribers seem to like this idea too, so I really hope you enjoy. I feel like opposing force, or OP4, isn't spoken enough about in these types of videos, but when it is, people praise the enemy variety, the weapons, and all the new stuff, and they're not wrong. But what do I praise? Well, I'm glad you asked, Patrick. Sit back, relax, and grab a head crab. This is gonna be interesting. Trust me, I made the video. My favorite thing about opposing force is how it expands the universe and puts you in the shoes of, well, the opposing force. But it never feels like it forces you to be anyone in particular. Of course, you're obviously Corporal Adrian Shepard, but if you watched a previous video of mine, one thing that I enjoy about Half-Life and its expansions is that it doesn't mean that your version of the character, if you will, acts a certain way or has the same morals or values in gameplay. On a similar note, what was your Shepard like? Did he do what the government ordered, or did he take it into his own hands? Another thing that makes this even cooler is that, of course, with OP4 being developed by Gearbox, Valve has basically decided that OP4 doesn't definitively fit into either canon or non-canon. It's just not canon. Mark Laidlaw, the lead writer, also wasn't the biggest fan of the ideas of canon or non-canon in media, so to put it simply, what happens in OP4 stays in OP4. Unless they reuse Black Mesa and Shepard, which is, well, you know, not the most likely of things actually. Adrian Shepard, that is. Not this guy. Sorry, I mean this one. Technically, in Blue Shift, you could be just as much of a murderous douche as Gordon, aside from the fact that you do have to save Rosenberg and the crew. But Barney appears in Half-Life 2 as a hero, so that would probably mean that any of the murders you committed in Blue Shift were not really canon, so to speak. Since Shepard doesn't appear again, we can assume that everything is as we left it. Black Mesa's nuked, and Shepard is either the typical cleanup grunt, a tragic hero who must follow orders, or simply a hero who stands up against the man and decides that his chances of survival are slim, and so he may as well disobey his orders just this once and do what he knows is right. This is how Valve works. Strange, I know. So technically, from this, many timelines are created, but technically they're also not. Valve never said any of this was canon, just not that it wasn't, or rather, they said that it wasn't not. Thanks, Mark, you really made this easy for me. Also, to the average player, the grunts may seem like faceless sadists who scoot from room to room, killing whatever or whoever they come into contact with. This, of course, isn't the case. In typical Half-Life fashion, it's darker and more complicated than you may think. And I mean, you know what, this isn't far from life. There aren't really any bad guys throughout the first game, apart from I guess the government and possibly the G-Man, but we don't really know. Oh wow, that's a good video idea. I mean, moving on. First of all, let's get the basic point out of the way. The HECU are deployed under strict orders from the government. Disobeying orders is not an option. These orders were also very sudden. We can work this out by reading Shepard's diary entries, specifically the ones on May the 9th and May the 15th. May the 9th details that Shepard has been told he and his squad must become masters of indoor combat in 7 days. No explanation. The name Black Mesa has been thrown around, but everyone suspects it'll be pretty mundane. He notes that it's pretty strange, but kind of hopes it doesn't happen because the mission doesn't seem to have much excitement potential, and that he'd rather hold out for something with much more likelihood of combat. Now that, my friends, is some foreshadowing or dramatic irony there, if I have ever seen it. Anyway, you're probably wondering where this is all going. My point is that the Marines went in a day later than that diary entry, and wouldn't have been prepared for the horrors they ended up fighting, both in terms of what to expect and in terms of psychological damage. Nothing like this was explained to them. The insertion of the soldiers is no cakewalk. They're shown the dangers of this place pretty quickly, but their orders stand. However, some soldiers, including Shepard, didn't actually get the orders, which could, in theory, confuse this whole storyline. What the soldiers are likely experiencing at this level could be some mix of compliance and the agentic state. Compliance is the least personal form of conformity and extends to actions in public, but your core values and beliefs are still the same, and it's hard to know if we can extrapolate this to mass murder, such as what the Marines commit in the game, but it's certainly the easiest way to label it. We can see an example of this in-game. One soldier says, "I didn't sign up for this shit. Monsters, sure, but civilians? Who ordered this operation anyway?" You see, he doesn't like this, but orders are orders, right? A lot of Marines must have thought this, but they did nothing to stop the murder of the poor scientists. The soldiers were scared and unsure of how to fight these aliens, much like how the Viet Cong's guerrilla tactics instilled panic, hysteria, and mass killings. So most of the Marines would see no alternative to following orders and wouldn't be able to cope with the amount of bloodshed, human and alien alike. And that's where the main theme of Half-Life comes in. Shepard is the right man in the wrong place. The only one with the guts to make a difference. He's no better off than his peers, and he's a mere corporal, but he has the ability to tear himself away from the authoritarian personalities of the rest of the soldiers. Or does he? It's all determined by the player. You have the ability to kill scientists, but also the ability to kill the people you trained with in order to, in your mind, save said scientists. You can also kill everyone and everything, at least as soon as they're no longer useful. Like I said, this is very similar to Gordon's situation. But Gordon isn't level with everyone else. He has his suit. The HECU are all supplied with powerful equipment as standard. They're all trained the same. Shepard is simply able to take his own path to success, ignoring orders for survival and for what's morally right. Or he could be the same as the others, a machine that follows orders, using scientists and guards to advance through the facility to fight for survival. He needn't spare any of them. Or a particularly impulsive player may play a damaged Shepard who kills everyone. We only really get to play him properly after the crash and after the horrors he witnesses before he comes to. Maybe in theory that could change him, altering his actions later in the game. Gordon does what he must to survive, and our actions are a projection of our morals in games, typically. He's heralded as a hero in the sequel, and we're given no chance to act otherwise. Gordon may as well not even be silent in the second game as far as I'm concerned. Barney, however you play him, is canonically, or as canon as Half-Life gets, a hero. He saves lives and continues to do so in the sequel. Shepard is possibly the most open-ended character we play in the series, if nothing else, simply for the lack of follow-up content to prove that any one playstyle is the real Shepard. It's entirely player-determined. This, in theory, means that Adrian's character handles the whole silent protagonist thing even better than Gordon's. Your choices are, so far, all canon in a way. And this is why I think Adrian Shepard is officially the coolest or most interesting character you can play in the Half-Life series to date. Half-Life's silent protagonist, Gordon Freeman, is defined by many things. His ahead-of-the-time clout goggles, his hipster-ass ponytail, and, oh yeah, that instantly recognizable suit. Almost forgot that one. All of these things are very Gordon Freeman. Or they were until those glasses became popular semi-recently. Thanks, hipsters. Anyway, I digress. Speech. Gordon is about as sociable as a rock. The only difference is really being that he's smart, looks good in orange, and can kill you in many, many more ways. Twice as slowly. Many have theorized about this subject. Some think he's, not really a people person. I've seen some people suggest that he's autistic. I don't think that's a very good suggestion, but there is an answer, and it does make sense. There are, of course, bad points, but I may just cover these in a later video. Time for facts. Originally posted by Mark Laidlaw, we have these. Gordon Freeman, whatever his strengths and weaknesses, is defined entirely by his design constraints. Silence is the keystone of his character. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but fortunately there are plenty of games with talking protagonists. We don't have to turn Half-Life into one of those. That said, the strong silent type jokes are way past their expiration date. Even the very first and freshest one was slightly curdled. Then we have another one that's actually in reference to a Half-Life movie. This project always crashes up against the hard reality that Gordon Freeman is a cipher, a Teflon conduit for the player's senses. As soon as you try to turn him into an actual character, separate from the player's will, he loses whatever it is that makes him an interesting first-person game protagonist. By the way, I'm not just pulling this out my ass, I do have a source, and I'll link it in the description below. Thank you to Reddit, particularly this lovely user, for providing me with this source. Moving on. The point Laidlaw is making is that Gordon was always just supposed to be you. And this is why I personally disagree with those who say it was just lazy or something to make Gordon silent. Half-Life is anything but lazily made. Believe me, details weren't thrown at you to set him up. He never had explicit motives aside from survival, and you have some examples of free choice in this game. As you may know, you can murder all your scientist pals and suffer no consequences. And the same goes for the security guards, except they'll fruitlessly try to plug you with lead before they take that fatal crowbar to the face. If Gordon could speak, he might love it. Or he might think what he's doing is disgusting. Think about the Postal dude in Postal 2. He clearly doesn't mind murder. But if Gordon did, why would he continue? Gordon's silence makes his moral choices very much the player's own. It makes his control by the player kind of make in-universe sense. He displays no objection nor satisfaction. Gordon is a vessel. To a less extreme extent, as covered in my previous video, Gordon can choose to hurry to the test chamber or annoy people along the way and just generally be a dick. Gordon's character is never established to the point at which it's obvious if he is a dick, but it's not established that he's very polite or punctual either. It's established that he's late, but it's up to the player to decide if he's lazy or just got stuck in traffic. We all know that feel. While it's implied by his scientist peers that he may be a bit of a bore, some actually seem happy to see him. Take from that what you will. Gordon also isn't forced to save any scientists. While there is an incentive, the player isn't forced into it. Again, I think this depends on the player's morals. They may not even look at it as a moral decision. They might think of it as gameplay only, and they maybe want to carry on blasting crabs. Maybe they just want that health boost. Or, in the security case, maybe they want whatever goodies are behind that security door. I asked Reddit what they do when they're in this situation, and here's a basic idea of what I got. One user said, "To me, the scientists are one of the many things in this game that force you to stop and actually think about your moral compass." Questionable ethics, man. And while I upvoted him for the really helpful response, part of me wanted to downvote him for that bloody pun. Someone said, "Really? I prefer the guards. All the scientists do is complain." Followed by a small comment chain of, "Stop!" Other people say they're just useful for health boosts and that they put them out their misery when they're done with being useful. That's a bit psychopathic, but I'm not here to judge. So here we have a clearly wide range of how people treat the various human NPCs in this game, and it's very interesting to see, because that leads us to my next point. Killing or saving scientists and your own attitude towards it is just a really interesting way to see how the game subtly allows us to create our own Gordon. My Gordon saved everyone he could simply because he felt it was right, because, well, that's a projection of my own morals. What was your Gordon like? Savage scientist or helpful hipster? Without a doubt, Gordon's silence is very overlooked and misunderstood by some newcomers to the series, and somehow some big fans. And in today's climate, I don't blame them, as they spoon feed us absolutely everything nowadays in games, and I'm not saying games are any worse for this now, but they're in a way probably better because it makes games more accessible, but it leaves them often bleaker for those who enjoy unpredictable plots with more twists and turns than Black Mesa itself. I wonder how many people have dismissed Gordon's silence as a missing feature or lack of storytelling, when in reality, it's the opposite, but it's often so subtle that you don't even realize you are Gordon, and Gordon is inside you. Well, actually, you're inside Gordon, but I'm gonna stop talking. The Vortigaunts, excuse me for saying that like an English person, they like to shoot electric stuff at you. If they spot you, they'll call more buddies to shoot more electric stuff at you. If you smack them a good few times with all reliable, they'll take off and start running away. They try to hide, and they won't even attack you unless you corner them. They don't want to die. This is a huge difference, as most enemies at the time would simply run at you or stay in one place. Then of course you find out that they're slaves to a big alien baby thing, and then it all makes sense. They probably don't want to attack you anyway. Which is, by the way, cemented in Half-Life 2. But see, that's so realistic, it makes killing them out of anything other than self-defense pretty morally grey. And this isn't even everything they do. This one enemy tells and shows us so much about the game, and we don't even realise it. This kind of behaviour is seen later to a lesser extent in Halo. Good old grunts flailing their arms about like clowns on the battlefield. They run for their lives, and I suppose you could say this is a sign of influence. But then again, newer games do call for more advanced AI anyway. Oh, and by the way, you know the cockroaches? The little Doritos with legs? Well, they also have their own AI. And even I didn't know that until like last year. And I'm not claiming to be a genius or anything, although I do watch Rick and Morty, but I am a massive Half-Life fanboy. These little guys have a sense of smell, are spooked by light and dark areas, and run from bigger things. Okay, granted that last one wasn't too impressive, but keep in mind that this was being advertised as an actual selling point for a late 2013 game in the form of Fish AI, despite it already being done by 1996's Super Mario 64 Half-Life, GTA San Andreas, and probably a bunch of other games I don't have time to research when it comes to atmospheric NPCs running away from you. Right, moving on. I'd just like to mention the Marines. While they're not going to win all of the AI Nobel Prizes, especially not the peace one, they're often overlooked when it comes to how they add a whole other side to the story, expanded upon in the famous Opposing Force expansion for the base game. Without going into the details of that game right now, I can say I fully agree with Racevic, I hope I said that right, when he says they control the movement and flow of almost every combat sequence they appear in. They rush, take cover, and flank, using their speed and numbers to dictate how the Freeman decides to dispatch them. They also throw grenades at you, which happens a bit too often, but hey, we're not here to criticize today. Keep in mind that they manage all this while tweeting mean things at you in piss-poor English. Character and game design, I like it. Okay, well, that last part isn't exactly AI. It counts. The Vorts, Bull Squids, and Hound Eyes also do this, the latter of which I'd like to talk about now. Hound Eyes are like little alien doggos, except instead of playing fetch, they like to blow your head up with supersonic waves, a bit like XXX Tentacion. A little worse than barking at the wall and keeping you up all night when you have a test tomorrow. But anyway, these guys, actually like dogs, have pretty good pack-based AI. I mean, the dogs are real, so I guess it's not AI, but Hound Eyes like to take a nap, and they like to do some nap and guard shift thing, but when one space doggo sleeps, the other space doggo keeps watch with those big old eye things. And while they're in a group, the unofficial pack leader keeps watch. If the leader spots anything amiss, the whole pack wakes up and engages. And that's pretty awesome. Kinda reminds me of how hostile I am when my brother wakes me up. Hell, depending on the amount of noise you make nearby, Hound Eyes can either get up like it's another college day, or jump up like the pizza delivery dude just rang the doorbell. Gordon Freeman and his expansion friends are excellent at taking down whatever threats come their way. But you know what I realized? These threats aren't exactly all antagonists. Sure, some of them are scary as hell or annoying, and I guess they all try to kill us, but we never see or at least understand the real brains behind the bad guys. Grey morality is a big theme in the series, and this is a great touch in my opinion. Anyways, let's get into it. Sit back, relax, and grab a crowbar, because we're deconstructing most of the main enemies in the game and finding out why they may not be as bad as we think. The game would have you believe that on a surface level, everything is out to get you, and it's unquestionably evil, that is, unless you really think about it. The higher we get on the intelligence scale, the more interesting things become. First and foremost are the Zen fauna, the first things we encounter. Barnacles? They're passive, dormant, indiscriminate about their prey. The boys are just trying to get some food, and besides, they're not exactly winning any evil mastermind prizes regardless, which can also be said for the rest. These guys are, in a way, a more sentient version of, say, a Venus flytrap. They attempt to eat anything that shows up, including stuff like barrels and wood. Headcrabs are born with an innate combat response to danger, as we can see when we fight the big bald boy. The adult ones we encounter in the facility aren't really any different. As far as they know, they're fighting for survival or food. This is supported by the fact that they can be seen fighting bull squids in the first game, who are very territorial and threatening. Perhaps headcrabs are also their prey. Headcrabs aren't intelligent enough to be evil per se. A bit like Alyx. They're no more evil than, say, a shark. The same goes for bull squids, snarks, shark boys, and tentacles. Nothing more to say there. Hound Eyes are a bit more interesting because they demonstrate pack-based AI, such as their attacks having more power together, which allows us to compare them to the typical canine. Of course, their physiology is going to be quite different, but through observation, a few things can be determined. Hound Eyes do stuff like investigating machinery and TVs and stuff, exhibiting a curiosity similar to a canine, but also a higher level of intelligence than the other fauna. The intelligence is cool, but hostility in pack animals towards outsiders is all too common, hence why animals such as wolves are such a problem in the wild. Not evil, fiendishly cute. I think the intelligence could work in their favour, and perhaps domestication could have been possible if anyone had the chance. In conclusion, I don't think any of the lesser animals are evil at all. They're just that, animals. Stick a bunch of snakes, big cats, wolves and such with no knowledge of society or anything beyond what they get in the wild in a room with a bunch of skittish, loud scientists, or really anything unfamiliar. It would be very much the same, and very messy. Alien grunts are manufactured, as seen in the Zen factories, and it's unknown if the same is true for Garks, but grunts being manufactured by the Vorts, and therefore being part of the Nihilant's ecosystem, means they're not going to have any free will, and since they're created by something higher up, they're not going to be the bad guys. Their creators, or at least their manufacturers, The Vorts, known as alien slaves in the first game, kind of makes their situation pretty obvious. They're enslaved and under control of the Nihilanth, appearing to be sentient, sapient creatures. Subtle storytelling shows us this in the first game, where they will flee when hurt, not attacking unless you get close up. And of course, in the second game, where they're free, they're some of our greatest allies. This leads us nicely to the alien controllers. These guys are pretty evil, but they're still acting on behalf of the big space baby, they themselves being small space babies. They function as overseers for the slaves and the manufactured creatures, keeping them in check, making sure they follow their master's wishes. This can be seen clearly in the Zen mines, where the working Vorts won't attack you, but immediately engage when controllers show up. Then we get to what seems to be the big bad, Nihilanth. We kill him and all, but the whole time, all he seems to do is warn us about the G-Man. Odd. Of course, with what we know from Half-Life 2 and such, the Nihilanth was part of a dwindling species, not native to Zen, like most of its inhabitants, cornered by none other than the Universal Union. Or the Combine if you're a sailor. Everything the Nihilanth did was a last-ditch effort to escape and save himself. He sent his forces to Earth because, well, thanks to the resonance cascade, Earth was ripe for the picking, like a nice, shiny space apple. So, the Combine. Surely we can shift the blame onto them, right? Well, probably yeah. I mean, almost certainly, but what if it turns out they have some greater plan? This is all too much to discuss in one video. Anyway, back to the space baby. Was what he did evil? Well, you'd have no difficulty convincing anyone that slavery and warfare are objectively pretty unpleasant things. But the man, the fetus, had his reasons. He tried to save his people things, and it backfired. All because of the right man in the wrong place. Anyway, in my previous video, I discussed the aliens, and in this one, I'm discussing humans, and not quite humans. So as always, sit back, relax, and grab one of those Dr. Breen bust things, because I'll be covering the relevant human NPCs and their involvement in the disaster. And as with the previous video, as we scale the power meter to the top, it becomes more interesting and involved. So the scientists and the blue boys are kind of on the same level, but the scientists in fact have a higher clearance level, an average of 5. We see in Blue Shift that Barney has a level of just 3. This quickly becomes quite irrelevant when the main way to judge someone becomes their combat abilities, but at the same time, a lot of stuff went on before the disaster. But they're kind of similar, so I'm just going to put them together. Peanut Butter and Jelly, Walter and Barney. These guys are at the very bottom, reduced to cannon fodder for horror or comedic effect, or simply to teach players game mechanics such as those laser thingies to save us from a similar fate. In universe, they get up to much more. An interesting thing to note is that when we play the chapter Questionable Ethics, the scientists have done some pretty messed up stuff to the Zen creatures, including torture, weapon testing, and even constructing giant machines made to destroy them in the most efficient ways. Or examine them, right? This adds another bit of depth to them, suggesting that they're pretty messed up. In their defense though, it's their job, so maybe the administrator's responsible. Not that we're talking about him now. There's a pretty cool level of irony to the scientists getting absolutely destroyed by the aliens they exploited, but they're not really high enough on the pecking order to be responsible. The HECU and Black Ops are also following orders, which are likely a lot stricter. As I've said before, some Marines even talk about how they don't want to shoot civilians in OP4. Some of them are particularly sadistic, but the same can be said for most military people. Or most people. This next section is going to be based a lot more on speculation and stuff, but it has to be, for certain reasons. At the time of the events that took place during Half-Life, Wallace Breen was the administrator. He was basically in charge of almost everything, from how the lab functions to the ridiculous ties. But this is where it gets juicy. So at the start of the game, we see G-Man talking to a scientist. Could the scientist have actually been Breen? Pretty fishy if you ask me. We then find out, just before everything goes wrong, that he went to some lengths to get it. That being the crystal. Some lengths? A negotiation with the G-Man? I mean, if not, it was one of his employees, same difference. So G-Man clearly wants this crystal examined. In fact, to further support this, we see him stealing one in Decay, which ends up being the one that triggers the disaster. Of course, there's no originality to this. I'm not going to pretend that you guys don't know that the G-Man has been tampering with things all along, and that's kind of the point he's there. But while we could assume that the some length statement refers to the dead HEVs we see in Zen, that likely isn't the case, since it's pretty clear that the G-Man has provided the sample as part of his master plan. Breen is fully aware of the G-Man. He makes reference to Gordon's stasis and tells Gordon his services are open to the highest bidder. G-Man obviously knew that this particular crystal would have this particular effect, and he was adamant in getting it examined to trigger the disaster. But this is where things get a bit iffier, purely because purely because of how little we know about the G-Man. He either wanted the destruction of Earth, or he wanted the Combine to attack Earth as some sort of master plan to take them down. He'd need an incredible amount of foresight that only a highly intelligent advanced being with more powerful superiors could have. The former goal seems counterproductive. If the G-Man wanted Earth's destruction, why would he bother to save Gordon and push him forward? The way I see it is this: the G-Man must have notified Breen about what would happen, promising him power if he did his bidding, or even threatened him. This could have been a way to manipulate Breen into lighting the fuse, or he could have been contacted directly by the Combine themselves. This one seems a little less likely, but if Black Mesa had very direct contact with Zen, why not the Combine? We know that the Combine are unable to travel within a universe, only between them, so they wouldn't successfully be able to invade us without a miracle, a deliberate setup, or a collaboration of Combine and human teleportation technology. Some people have argued that the Combine don't exist in Half-Life 1, so this can't be true. I disagree. The Nilanth is situated in Zen, the last of his kind, escaping a threat. As far as we know, none of the species on Zen are native. In Zen, the Nilanth was cornered. If you want in-game examples, listen for example to how he says, "We are their slaves." Whose slaves? Well, the Combine. If that's not satisfactory enough, take Word of God instead. Mark Laidlaw seals it. What we saw in Half-Life 1 was the very end of a long struggle between the Combine and the last of the Nilanth's race. The Nilanth's world, if it could be said to have, was long since in the past as far as the Nilanth was concerned. Zen was their final retreat. They had their back to the wall, as it were, when the Fissure appeared that let them spill into our dimension. Zen itself is a sort of dimensional transit bottleneck, an area of continual contention. I love this quote because it directly tells us that the Combine are indeed intended to be in the first game behind the scenes. This makes the story of Half-Life 2 make a lot more sense. If you watched my previous video with my point about the Nilanth not being 100% evil, but certainly not being the primary antagonist, that should make a lot more sense now too. See, I told you to watch it. With all that being said, in my humble opinion, Breen is the man to blame for the events of the games. Breen negotiated with the G-Man, indirectly causing the resonance cascade, allowing Zen and later Combine forces into Earth. The Combine are the big bad, but Breen is the facilitator. I mean, if it isn't Breen behind this, why is he the specific man chosen for the role of Earth's ruler? He's a scientist, not a politician, not a diplomat, a scientist. The Combine had like 7.5 billion other people to choose. And yes, the population likely took a massive hit during the 7-hour war, but are you telling me that out of every human left on Earth, there was not one qualified man or woman? And then, regardless of profession, out of anyone they could have chosen at random, they chose Breen? Seems legit. Let's go a little deeper. If we assume that the G-Man set the Combine up, allowing them to invade only to fall, wouldn't that mean he'd need to intend for Breen to fall the whole time, tempting him with empty power? Yes, it would, but there's evidence for that too. First is simple. Gordon becomes an advanced killing machine in one day, able to take on the Combine's strongest forces. This is the G-Man's doing, undoubtedly. Gordon should have died multiple times, including possibly during the resonance cascade where he's knocked out, the Citadel reactor explosion, the train explosion, and well, most enemy encounters actually. The G-Man has no qualms when it comes to punishing those who don't follow his instructions, as seen in the choice he gives Gordon at the end of Half-Life, and his attitude towards Gordon altering Alyx's fate with the Vorts. If any of this was remotely against the G-Man's plan, Gordon would be screwed, but he's not. He's praised. He's hired again, and G-Man really doesn't seem to like Breen, criticizing him for being a naysayer when it came to him taking Alyx from Black Mesa. He also suggests that, despite his wishes, he wasn't permitted to kill him directly. This not only suggests that the G-Man is himself overseen by more powerful superiors, hinting that this could have easily been orchestrated, but also suggests that this is exactly what G-Man was using Gordon for in Half-Life 2. The first thing you see of note is a Breen cast. The last thing you do before you're put back in stasis is kill him. Even this suggests that this was Gordon's purpose. His mission was over, and thus was the game. Breen's death, or perhaps the way in which it's done, frenzied the Combine. This was all the will of the man in the blue suit. Half-Life, as you may know, released on the 8th of November 1998 to critical acclaim. And as you may have seen in my previous videos, it did things such as AI, story, and level design remarkably well for the time. But things weren't always as they are today. In fact, the game experienced some pretty large changes in terms of tone and design overall. How do we know this? Well, I'm glad you asked. One of the coolest things to ever happen in terms of pre-release discovery is this disc here, Half-Life Alpha 0.52. We saw this alpha shared to Reddit in 2013, and then it went on to sell for a huge $709 US on eBay. That's 133.3 copies of Seinfeld Series 1 and 2 on DVD, or 36.3 Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson action figures. With this in mind, I can confirm that whoever bought this disc spent their money well. And of course, this disc was never meant to be held by mere mortals like us, and was actually created for media outlets as a preview. This disc shows us, for example, that there are many elements of today's game which are definitely pretty far removed from what they used to be, but also elements that were, well, just removed. Like originally, our good friend Barney was originally going to blame the scientists for the Black Mesa incident and be a secondary enemy, along with his many clones, with the Marines also being Black Mesa's own in-house Marines, rather than some government cleanup crew. Also, everyone just looked like they were on MDMA, like I'm serious. Would you save that? Especially if many of you are sadistic sons of bitches towards the scientists, I assume the answer is no. Moving on, more excitingly, we have the included content that allowed us to see all this. A lot of unpolished, unfinished, or just different maps and segments are shown, mostly through demos that Valve staff themselves have recorded. There are also some hidden trailers and techie information. The guns are unfinished, the scripting is unfinished, the HUD is totally different, but we can still explore those maps that gave us the best insight into what could have been. There are 21 maps available, including demonstrations of some of the game's most notable chapters, such as the Portal Device, the Office Warrens, and the Communications Center. If that doesn't sound quite right to you, that's because those are all working titles for Unforeseen Consequences, Office Complex, and Forget About Freeman respectively.
This means we know about a couple of enemies that we unfortunately missed out on. One enemy in particular became a major fan favorite because of how incredibly disgusting it was in concept. Half-Life fans probably already know what I'm talking about, but for those who don't, meet Mr. Friendly. Designed by a 12-year-old, which might be the first time that insult is actually completely true, Mr. Friendly is a sexually oriented monster designed to elicit a response from the innate homophobia of the target audience. Sadly, it wasn't included in the full game, but you can see it in basically every mod put out since, as it was fully rendered and ready to go. On the other hand, some enemies were shown but never included, such as the Panther Eye. This was an enemy we saw in the alpha briefly, and then it was mysteriously cut from the finished game. However, the saddest loss might be the Flocking Floater. Removed early in the game, this was going to be a passive enemy, something that wouldn't instantly attack the player unless attacked itself. It would have given Zen, a seriously lacking part of the game as it is, a bit more character, some fauna that isn't just a giant testicle or a giant baby, but instead a giant balloon filled with poison.
Yes.
And, as I said earlier, in addition to enemies we simply never saw, there were enemies we know and love, but different. The Black Ops Assassins, for example, were originally to be a team of different operatives with different specialties, working to assist the Marines in kicking your ass. And that's right, they were supposed to be together. Nowadays, of course, we know that's no longer the case. Somewhere between the alpha and the full release of the game, the Black Ops Assassins and the Marines had a bit of a falling out, and as we see in opposing force, they were successful in completing their final mission of detonating a nuclear bomb to wipe all evidence of the disaster. Didn't really work out for you, huh? They were originally to use a crossbow too, and you can actually see the quiver on the model. They also have some cool AI in retail, such as investigating sounds, creating a similar luring ability to our friend Cash in Manhunt. But the exploration of the AI itself is of course for another video. Let's go back to what's missing.
Of course, the biggest thing that's missing from Half-Life 1.0 is uplink. This is the biggest part of Half-Life that you've never heard of. It's not even included in the Valve Complete Pack on Steam, and the only way to get it is as a mod pack for Half-Life itself. It's basically been forgotten, thrown away, and wiped off the table. The game itself, while short, consists of entirely new content that was never included in the full release. It's definitely not necessary content. The whole thing can be speedrun in about 2 minutes if you're not afraid of breaking the game a little, but it's still interesting stuff that really calls back to the original horror story origins of the Half-Life game. Your human enemies and their technological allies were significantly more powerful, capable of jibbing bodies in front of them. There were scientists being lined up against walls and executed by the security forces meant to protect them. There are pits filled with burning alien bodies and zombies hiding in air vents, feasting on the dead. Gordon would kill enemies by setting off their own explosives while they were still setting them, and stealth sections where you could hide in the shadows as enemy patrols moved by. Injured scientists would die in front of you, and other victims could be found around every corner. All of this leading up to an epic fight with a Gargantua, which would stalk you first before methodically killing every NPC that you'd met so far. It was a shocking difference to the Half-Life we got. Instead of the trope-worthy tram ride, you started with an aerial bombardment. The guards were snarky and hardly worth saving. Even your friendly scientist coworkers were not nothing more than fodder as you fought to get to safety underneath the uplink facility. It's a completely different experience, not a better one, but I'm pretty certain that Valve chooses to ignore this offshoot because it didn't quite link up with the direction they were taking the game.
Some other interesting stuff to mention is that back in the really early days, Half-Life was just known as Quiver. The name switched to Half-Life ended up focusing more on the sciencey side, and we know Valve loves their sciencey names. It was inspired by Doom, Quake, and The Mist by Stephen King. Anyway, that's all for this video, kind of. Stick around for some words from our friend Moriarty, and a list of honorable mentions of other stuff we never saw.
Thanks so much for having me. I am a huge Half-Life fan. This is one of the best games that's ever come out. It's definitely one of the most important games. Of course, there are other games that are equally important, maybe even more important. If you'd like to know more, I have a 15-minute video breaking down the 10 most important games of all time.
Today on the list of what makes Half-Life so special, I'd like to talk about the environments. Not all of them, but enough for you to get an idea of how diverse they are if you're a new player, and how impressive. I'll be going into detail with a couple, but definitely not all of them, because I'm not made of time. Half-Life's environments are impressive on two levels. One for the level design itself, and two for the scenery and how diverse the whole game is. As much as I love Half-Life, if you were just underground in this lab the whole time, I can tell you, you would not be having as much fun. Half-Life starts you off in a tram. Yes, that tram. No doubt an awesome display of graphical brilliance 20 years ago, which has been reduced a little more than a glaring inconvenience by many new players. I liked it the first time, and maybe even the 10th, but I can't exactly sit here and make a video about a chapter with no combat or free movement outside of the tram. Sorry, Trammy. Then of course you're dropped into the generic lab environment of chapters 1 through 2. And it does look very nice. I like that you get to investigate and explore this area both before and after you screw everything up. This is a great storytelling element and acts as a dark reprise, which really adds weight to what you've done. The light-hearted talk of donuts and ridiculous ties is completely flipped on its head when you return from your failed experiment to find almost everyone you previously talked to, annoyed, or even laid your spectacled eyes on either dead, dying, or worse. And for me, that short unarmed section and some enemy introductions are particularly memorable. I think Half-Life's horror elements are overlooked, but that's just my opinion. Of course, this isn't to disregard the various other bits and pieces that happen between now and you reaching the next zone. Packs of Hound Eyes, Box World, and Vort's more eager to come out the closet than iDubbbz TV are just some of the cool moments that keep us on our toes. Notice that this all logically fits together in some way. No level changes for each changing environment apart from some loading screens, and more of them than we've ever seen. Smooth, like a head crab. After making your way through bull squids, zombies, and endless throngs of crabs and barnacle boys, the design really does switch up, but it's quite subtle. The game gets a little more daring with its enemy placement and how the environment works for and with it from this point. The next chapter happens to also be a favourite of mine, so forgive me for spending more time on it as an individual segment of the video. From the shiny, cold, more linear corridors of the earliest chapters, we end up in the boxy office complex. In terms of scenery, the palette completely changes from the aforementioned cold tones to a warmer, almost more comfortable feel. This is, of course, not representative of the horrors within. From the start, I feel like this chapter has parts that are designed with ways the enemy can completely blindside you and screw you over, for lack of a more polite term. I mean, turn right through that initial elevator and you'll witness a scientist getting the suck straight off the bat. The ceiling crumbles to reveal barnacles like this on a few occasions, but there are also sections in which the same tactic is used with headcrabs, and more headcrabs and vents than you can or want to shake a crowbar at. Luckily, at some point, fans start doing the job for you. For Vorts, we have these nice long corridors which allow them to really take advantage of their ranged attacks. Fortunately, Valve have kindly placed numerous obstacles around to shelter us or simply provide a little hiding space for you to reload. This creates a pretty cool weaving dynamic, which is, to be fair, used throughout the game. I'd say it's clear that, at this point, the game really starts to play with our expectations and is no longer the simple shooter it was just a chapter ago. As seamless as it was, I'd call Unforeseen Consequences more of a tutorial. Everything, while very fun, is much more routine. Run and shoot. Office Complex is where I feel the game becomes more run, think, shoot, as you work to get the electricity off, parkour around Gabe Newell's office like a pro Minecrafter, and eventually reach We've Got Hostiles. We've Got Hostiles introduces a new enemy, the Marine, along with some new stuff such as tripwires that trigger turrets, and tripwires that blow you the f*** up. In true Half-Life fashion, We're taught this new mechanic through the gruesome demise of yet another scientist. But not before we hear one of the most memorable lines from the series. I still find this funnier than I should. Anyway, these trip thingies are especially cool as they force you to be extra careful with every step you take. One false move could see you chunked, and while that's pretty simple, I enjoyed having to carefully jump around and avoid them. It added more movement to the game and forced you to take into account any aliens or scientists that may screw you over. I must have been killed at least once or twice by a spook scientist or particularly stupid headcrab. No need to avoid the wire when you can just get a buddy to trigger it for you. Another super notable part of We've Got Hostiles is that I'm pretty sure it's the first time the player is thrust into a proper outdoor environment. This totally contrasts against the cramped indoor settings of most of the game's maps, along with the often vertical nature of most of this chapter. Playing this chapter on the hardest difficulty is a real treat, as you're being targeted from all directions, dodging bullet after bullet, explosion after explosion. Blast Pit is next and revolves around the story of one big tentacle boy, several grenades, a big fan of mine, and one particularly stupid security guard. The most interesting things here are probably the tentacle, not as an enemy but almost for its sound-based movement and how it itself controls how you move through It itself controls how you move through the chapter. I class it as more of an environmental hazard than just another alien. Also, the fan is really cool. I really like the fan, and that's all I'm saying. I like this a lot because I feel like in general the whole chapter uses backtracking very well. You start at the tentacle, you learn more about the situation, you combat the situation by pressing a load of essential buttons and turning some knobs, and then success! You've prepared your very own alien calamari. And of course, since that involves you going back into areas you previously explored, I feel like that makes it meaningful, because it makes sense. It isn't just reusing assets for the sake of doing so. Please, go away. Power Up does this to an even greater extent. You're up against another looming monstrosity in another arena-type place. You have to go press some buttons fighting whoever or whatever gets in your way before sending them to hell. Another nice usage of backtracking or staying in one area, and I think stuff like this adds volume to the world, as they allow real exploration of one smaller area rather than rushing you along a series of tubes. Just knowing he was right behind me as I ran for my life was cool as hell, and it was a huge relief when I vaporized him. So from this we see that the game switches from simple to more complicated, shallow to dense, linear to more explorative, or at least less obviously linear. I'd say this is a huge part of what kept the game fresh and surprising. On a Rail is next, and while not that groundbreaking in itself, I'd say it does two things amazingly. One, it makes an excellent addition to this video, as it showcases just how much the game can change. And two, it nails the atmosphere. Like Jesus Christ, for me this might be the scariest Half-Life chapter, purely because of the creepy sounds that happen for apparently no reason, with apparently no origin. I'm not too sure if you'd say this chapter's linear or not. Like, it's in theory quite an A to B experience, but there are a lot of twists and turns and even more distractions along the way. Though it's often deemed confusing and unnecessarily long by some players, others say it's their favourite aspect of the chapter, as they're always able to find new cool stuff. Some people also really like frustrating rail shooters. No pun intended. I liked it, but mostly for the atmosphere. And before we get to the last one I want to talk about, I just want to make it clear that while there were other things I'd like to mention, I just wanted to mainly point out the diversity of the maps and what made them special. We've seen indoor life, outdoor life, water combat, so what's the next step? You guessed it, it's space combat. Okay, that sounded much more logical in my head. Zen is a funny one. I know a lot of people don't like it, and while I'm certainly not sure how I feel, I can say it's probably the weakest part of the game. Why? Well, probably for the simple fact that while low gravity is cool, the map is not. Now, don't get me wrong, there are parts of it that I thoroughly enjoy, but at the same time, I feel like there are parts of it that could have been cut so much shorter or made so much more succinct or actually effective had they decided to shorten them or take them out. Anyways, that's just an opinion. But really, as far as diversity and detachment from the rest of the game goes, Zen is it. I mean, it's in space, for God's sake. It's also really beautiful, and the sound design and the whole just design in general is actually really pleasing. I guess it's just so different from the rest of the game that it could be taken as a strength or weakness, and I think that's what makes Zen such a polarizing experience. I mean, there's also the question of if fighting a giant testicle is your thing, but anyway, that's all from me today. This video took a little bit longer than I would have liked, but that's because I'm also working on another video that would have taken longer than I would have liked if I didn't multitask, and I think you're going to love it, so stay tuned for that. And obviously, you're welcome to join my Discord if you like. We have quite a nice, sizable community there now as well. So it's lovely to see the channel growing. And thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart, as silly as it may sound, for 1,000 subscribers. It feels unreal. Thank you. The Metrocops in Half-Life 2 are very unpleasant guys. They yell at you, force you to put things in the trash, rush you, and also kind of shoot people. The last two are particularly bad. I really don't like being rushed in the morning. Does this mean they're evil? Well, from the perspective of the Freeman, most definitely. They're obstacles that need to be sorted out, preferably with a crowbar and lots of explosions. To the people, they're a silent but deadly force. But from a purely moral standpoint, things aren't as simple. Are they ever? I know I won't be the first person in the world to draw similarities to the Gestapo, or the secret police of Nazi Germany, or the thought police of Orwell's 1984, but there are several reasons why they're often compared. The most simple one is how they operate. They give the impression of omnipresence. It's dangerous to disobey the Combine because they'll find a reason, no matter how small, to break into your apartment block and eat your ass. They may always be listening, and I mean, the term civil protection is just pure doublethink. I've never seen one of these guys protect anything. This is directly shown by one of the citizens themselves, who suggests that no matter how good you think you are, even if you think the Metro Police have no reason to knock your door down and slap you, they'll find one. The Gestapo functions similarly. People feared them so much that they even informed on friends and neighbours, hoping to get better treatment or some form of protection. In reality, the Gestapo had relatively few operatives in each city, but the atmosphere of fear and the threat of losing everything kept most people in line. It was this very same way of thinking that made people join the regime. Ordinary people became police themselves for the same reasons. They all had families, houses, wishes and dreams. They just wanted to preserve them, albeit in a very dangerous and cowardly way. Over in the Half-Life universe, things aren't much different. Food is rationed out to the masses, who can only get their full ration reward if they're complicit, allowing the Combine to dig their claws deeper into control of Earth. The earliest parts of the game really show you how this takes its toll on people. The famous, "I didn't know we still had a door," is really haunting. This is oppression in full force. Safety and comfort are distant memories. So doesn't it sound so much nicer to be on what seemed to be the winning side? Power over the masses, a greater sense of purpose, food, water, shelter? Sadly, it does. That is, if you discount all the cruelty, betrayal of the human race, and downright inhumane actions involved in joining. Metrocops are unaltered too, unlike the Overwatch, meaning that they're conscious through everything they do. That's pretty disturbing. But does this mean they're evil? No. In fact, they're afraid. For example, the Overwatch voice actually mentions family cohesion and preservation in mission briefs. This most likely means that they're under the constant threat of losing their loved ones and their homes if they fail a mission or don't meet their meat-beating quota. These people are more cowardly than evil, and are quick to defect from the Combine when the top of the Citadel is blown. I compare this to Barry in Resident Evil. He briefly turns on us when Wesker threatens his family, because, as Wesker puts it, people like Barry are really easy to manipulate. Just threaten those close to them. I don't know, I still see them as ordinary weak people. Still don't feel bad about killing them. In fact, I often wonder if, deep down, we're supposed to feel bad. Overwatch soldiers are different. They're no more human than the replica soldiers from Fear, a game I really do need to make a video on. Metrocops though, I always wonder if the men I'm putting down in self-defense have mouths to feed, and if that was what motivated them to join. But, like I said, killing them is still pretty fun. What if from their perspective, the Combine is actually good thanks to propaganda? They make excellent wall decoration. Are any other Metrocops undercover without us knowing? I really like how they fly when you blow them up. In Nazi Germany, some police and even soldiers help those suffering behind the backs of their superiors. I wonder how many of them join just to bust a nut. I mean, in conclusion, as with most of the enemies in Half-Life 1, the civil protection of the second game are not textbook evil. They're antagonists, but they're still human. Half-Life 2 is different from the first game, in that we have a lot less info about the main antagonists, but I'm gonna assume that the Combine is evil, and if it's not, it is from our perspective. A lot of stuff in Half-Life 2 is made a little less ambiguous to make the story flow a little more naturally, which is acceptable, but I guess this is why we're able to label things like the Combine as absolutely evil. No good force would do what the Combine have done. And that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe hit that bell. If you made it this far, leave a comment about Squidward. You can also find my Twitter link below where we can continue this discussion, and any upcoming stuff on the channel. Also, check out my Patreon. Patreon subscriber thingies can also access my Discord server. We've got about 200 people now, and it's a pretty dank place. Speaking of which, thanks to the following nice boys for their generous donations. The Game Studios, Tuna, Nova Castro, Callan Catrino, Ross McKay, and Axelski. Patreon helps me pay for software and equipment for my channel, and I'm super grateful for even the tiniest contributions. With that said, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Love ya. So, Half-Life Alyx is finally here, and along with some fun puzzles, awesome gameplay and designs, we have ourselves another slice of the Half-Life story to chew on. One such piece of story is obviously the ending of the game, and the parts leading up to it see you apparently looking for one Gordon Freeman, who Russell theorizes is the one locked up in that big Combine vault. And this raises its own questions, but most of them are quickly answered when it turns out Gordon Freeman has invested in some drip, a new briefcase. Just kidding, it's G-Man. G-Man steps out and lets you know that, as expected, this game isn't an isolated adventure that takes place before the events of Half-Life 2, but rather a timey-wimey Heinz tin spaghetti game of Sudoku, one that actually continues the story. Sort of. He shows you the future, and, spoiler alert for an old-ass game, reveals to Alyx that her father will die, but that thanks to her actions in the game, he can be saved. She's very confused at first, but obviously chooses to save her father, with the consequence of becoming a replacement employee for Gordon. Flash forward to the present day in the Half-Life story, and Alyx is gone. We see a confused and angry Eli who quickly realizes just what has happened. But I've got to wonder, how did that event appear to Eli? Did he just see some lightning hit the advisor out of nowhere and assume it must be G-Man? Or does he actually have knowledge of the time travel stuff? In the end, some really interesting things do become clear though. One, Gordon will be playing through Half-Life 3 as a genuinely free man, free from the employment of G-Man, and not just temporarily like before. This means that he'll be facing the next game without plot armor potentially. It'll be interesting to see how his adventures play out without G-Man. However, Alyx is likely to have her own series, which leads me to my next point. Valve fans have been a little understandably salty that Alyx is VR only, but Alyx has demonstrated a ridiculous demand for full-scale VR games and Half-Life itself, with Valve unable to keep up with index sales. At this point, they can no longer say they're not sure if people want more Half-Life or not. So why would they deny millions their chance to buy a new game? They would sell enough copies to make Half-Life 2 sales look like a joke. This, along with Alyx and Gordon possibly being separated into two series, really suggests to me that Alyx will always be VR and Gordon will always be FPS. Think about it even at a gameplay level. Gordon is all about fast-paced, grand battles that see him cutting down hundreds of enemies, big and small, with his ordinary arsenal. He could cut through almost every enemy in Alyx in minutes with a crowbar alone, apart from maybe the Strider. It would make no sense to me to drop a gimped Gordon into a vulnerable, slow-paced VR position when we all know he's capable of taking down multiple Striders with ease, while Alyx barely manages one. What's most interesting to me is what this suggests for the future, and although we don't have the information right now, there is a lot there to suggest the direction the series could be going in. I wonder if Alyx will ever be made to work against Gordon at any point. Will Alyx be going to the Arctic with Gordon? I mean, there's just a lot there to think about. And for anything regarding future happenings in the series, your best bet is to check out Tyler McVicker at Valve News Network. So thanks for watching. It's been a while, but I'm back. I'm gonna start uploading again. I'm gonna hit the upload button. I'm gonna hit my dad really, really hard. If you enjoyed this and you're new, don't forget to check out the wealth of Half-Life content I have in my backlog on my channel. And if you enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe and the like button. I wish I could upload some proper gameplay of this game from me, but I don't actually own the equipment, so rip. But nevertheless, I will try my best to get more content out on Alyx. Until then, my next video will probably be focusing on Cry of Fear, so make sure you're ready for that. Jesus Christ, did you hear that kid in the background? I hate my neighbors sometimes. Anyway, I also stream on Twitch, so if you want to check that out, the link will be in the description below. I'm trying to build an audience on Twitch so I don't have to annoy YouTube viewers with stream notifications. God, this has been a really long outro, so I'll see you next time.
Half-Life 2 has a lot of very cool graffiti, much of which is thematically relevant to the game. Today, I'll be going through each piece that I believe has relevance, and watch for some fun facts towards the end too. Now, in the 5 or so years I've been gone, I did manage to pick up a bachelor's in graphic design. So I'm actually somewhat qualified to make this video, if such a concept exists. Now, graphic design is about visual communication, so what do these things communicate? The orange lambda seen on Gordon's suit eventually basically took the place of the anarchic A symbol that some of you may be familiar with. In-game it's used to mark loot locations, identify resistance members, or simply say, "We are here." Only thing I can really think to say here is sometimes we see the Lambda logo as part of other graffiti, such as this one, which is a fingerprint. Fingerprints are natural, unique identifiers, something that flies in the face of Combine philosophy. Could be calling upon the onlooker to join up. Remember who you are, a human with fingerprints and dental records. This one is very underrated in my opinion. Next we have some graffiti that appears to show evolution, ape to modern man, and then finally to a Combine soldier. Unless you read like way too much mango, this graffiti is sort of backwards. It starts with the soldier and ends with the ape. This implies a sort of unconventional viewpoint, spitting in the face of the Combine and their brain doohickeys, whereby not only is it preferable to be a human rather than enhanced, but it is in fact preferable to be a literal ape, to return to monkey, if you will. If I had to guess, perhaps whoever did this feels so strongly about freedom, they'd rather simply be an animal, roaming free. The intense oppression suffered under the Combine has made people dream of becoming less, to become more. Or maybe it's just backwards for the sake of being quirky. Then we have the famous Umbrella Man graffiti, which is really what it says on the tin. Bro is holding an umbrella with a trench coat. The rain is coming down hard, dropping like my subscriber count. Please help me get to 10k. And he's just staring blankly ahead. Now first, some people think this is a reference to G-Man, which I totally disagree with. It's one of those things where like, sure, it would be cool, but it would leave the graffiti thematically barren if its goal was not to imply that the Resistance knows of G-Man. And if they did, that would cheapen moments like Eli's reveal. This to me embodies the enduring human spirit. Oftentimes, while oppressive regimes leave people feeling downtrodden, they do feel quietly triumphant when steps are taken to fight back. I can tell you that during my time in Eastern Europe, I saw people that looked like this, mainly older people. Umbrella Guy is all of us, defiantly flying his black flag against a falling sky. Based. When you see this guy, try your best to think of him as an ally. I'm almost certain that's why someone would have painted him. The cast graffiti is next. Here we see a humanoid, either what seems to be a beta gas mask citizen or a conscript, huddled up against a human baby on a rocky floor. The word cast appears, looking quite similar to the Combine's lettering. The letters are sort of on top of each other in order. Keep that in mind. A caste system, spelt with an E, is a system of rigid social hierarchy, where people are assigned inherent social value based on characteristics such as skin color, family, genetic history, or whatever. It can get pretty arbitrary and be influenced by any number of factors. For a current example of this, we have India's caste system. India has missed the message of Half-Life 2 completely. Therefore, within this context, a caste would refer to one group within this system. The Combine are clearly operating a sort of two-tier system. They reign supreme over the original inhabitants of Earth. If we roll with the idea of the Combine being the upper caste, the Resistance would be the lowest. This graffiti explores feelings of vulnerability and oppression. It looks almost hopeless. The brightness of the baby, its unmasked face, and its glowing eyes, juxtaposed against the slumped, almost defeated looking character holding it desperately in their arms. This graffiti says, "Our children are the future. Hold on to them and stay safe, so that tomorrow they may not suffer like us." The large lettering of caste drills home this idea of a collective of people. The inheritors of the earth have been reduced to pests in the face of the Combine threat. The bottom of the caste system. This graffiti is such a great little piece of world building. Jesus Christ, it's born! This is my second favorite piece here. It depicts a hand, grasping at a lambda emblem, or raising it in triumph. But what does born mean? I can see a few possible meanings here. 1. A visual representation of the essence of the philosophical battle between human and Combine. Humans are born, Combine are manufactured. Humans are flesh and bone with flesh and bone concerns and ideas. Freedom. Love. While the Combine will never have this. And in some way, this apparent absence of spirit means the Combine are perpetually dead, whether walking or pinned to a shiny billboard. This is a big middle finger to the Combine, from the iconic shape of an arm and hand. 2. If we take the lambda to be an explicit insignia of the Resistance as a group, it could mean that one is only truly born when they join the Resistance and fight back against the Combine. 3. It could simply be referring to the birth of the Resistance. Perhaps a way to say, hey Combine, we've got guns too, and we are pulling up. The thing about fictional universes like this is that it's much harder to nail down intent. We can't ask the graffiti artists, though this also has the benefit of allowing multiple interpretations to be correct at once. Now, before we move on to the bonus facts round, I would like to draw attention to the fact that most of you aren't subscribed, so let's change that. Okay, bonus facts, let's go. Are you still with us, viewer? Not for much longer, I think, because the video only has a couple of minutes left. Here are a few fun facts about the graffiti in Half-Life 2. This graffiti here, or Moz, or simply Moz, has a barcode which Steam user Kiffinas determined bears a number identical to the zip code for a place called Freeman in West Virginia. This next graffiti is an electrical diagram denoting resistance. This one explains itself. This is orange and says BTC, meaning Half-Life 2 predicted Bitcoin, and the economy is fake. This piece is a reference to the then girlfriend, now wife, of Matt Wood, a level designer for Valve. I think I've covered everything I can speak on now. Can you make anything of the other graffiti featured in the game? I'd love to hear from you if you can. Many more videos to come, some really fleshed out ideas, as well as streams and shorts. See you next time!